being a working professional, you know, you get judged on your appearance. Got the old Spanx on today. The reality is you just have to look the part. Got to look good. Spend about an hour in the morning for hair and makeup. 7 different types of face creams. $200 a month for cut and colour. My wife pays about $50 though. Well, that's just what you got to do if you don't want to be invisible by the time you're 40. Am I right? Too slutty? Too fun. Perfect.
My heels are really uncomfortable to walk in, so I've got the old joggers on for the commute.
You'd be much prettier if you smiled. Shush, jump.
So I work here. It's about 100 people, 3 men now, which is great. Affirmative action at play, yes.
Richard's not in. Do you mind filling in a reception?
Hey, sweetie, do you mind organising a card for Sally? Thank you.
Boss can be a little bit touchy-feely at times, though.
Oh, you're tired today. Gotta relax a bit.
Yeah, I guess girls will be girls.
While you're down there.
Yeah, it's not a bad workplace.
Before we start, I'd love a coffee. Would you mind, sweetie? Thanks. Just a cap would be great.
Same cap with one, thanks, darling.
Yeah, so basically what I was thinking is...
Yeah, I've got a work husband, Luke.
Twinsies.
Get a room, you two. Can I join in?
Keeps me sane.
Hey, who's up for golf with the ladies?
Oh, mate, I'm
Yeah.
about it.
Ladies go.
Ladies go.
Yeah, I found out my female colleague's getting paid more than me, even though we literally do exactly the same job. It's just the way it is, I guess, eh? Sometimes Luke and I go out for a drink after work, which is loads of fun.
You men can come through.
There are some benefits to being manned.
Yeah, it can get pretty hectic at times. Thank you so much. Cheers.
I got that for you.
Oh, thank you. I'm okay.
Look, some women just can't take a hint.
This is from the lady over at the bar.
There's no way I am drinking that. Jesus.
I've got that for you.
Oh, thank you. I'm fine though.
You are so f***ing up yourself.
Sorry, is this woman bothering you?
Oh, no, it's fine. I'm just going to go to the bathroom. Can you watch my drink? Oh, cheers. Anyway, getting home, I like to keep my keys in my hand. Makes me feel safer. Sometimes I pretend like I'm listening to something, just so women don't bother me. I try to avoid parks.
Boy.
Nice ball.
4 men got raped and murdered in parks last month.
Check out that ass.
Us boys have to look out for each other.
Both funny and painful. It's hard. There's a real journey through that in that 2 minutes there. So welcome to this session on equality. I'm Kevin Delaney. I'm the editor-in-chief and a founder of a news organization called Charter, and we're about creating a better future of work. You can visit us at charterworks.com. I'm excited to be back here at the Open Forum. There's always a great engaged discussion in this group, and I'm expecting that you all will live up to that precedent today. So we have a topic surely worthy of all of our attention. It's the gender gaps that continue to afflict so many of our societies and organizations around the world. The World Economic Forum estimates that it will take 135 years to close the gender gaps around the world at the rate that we're going. The gap actually widened the last time that they looked at it. So what can we do to accelerate narrowing the gap? Is there an inclusive movement that can move us forward? How can we include everyone in the conversation around gender equality? Those are our questions today. I'm joined here by a really remarkable panel. We're going to discuss the topic for about 60 minutes, and then we're going to invite you all to ask questions for roughly the following 30 minutes. If you happen to be on social media and you're sharing about this session, we ask you to use the hashtags WEF22 and OpenForum22 so we can be sure to see and amplify your posts. So I'm going to start by introducing the panel, and then we'll move into the discussion. Sitting right next to me is Samantha Akwe. She's a poet, a public servant, and a leader who is Diversity Talent Manager at Mozilla, the US tech organization. Samantha is also the outgoing curator of the World Economic Forum's Oakland Hub in the US, in California. Sitting next to her is Angela Lungati. She's a technologist, community builder, and open source software advocate. She's the executive director of Ushahidi, which is in South Africa. It's a global nonprofit technology company that builds tools for democratizing information, increasing transparency, and lowering barriers for individuals to raise their voices. Next to Angela, we have a hometown hero, Philip Wilhelm, the mayor of Davos. Thank you for hosting us here. Philip was born and raised in Davos. He studied architecture. He had an architecture studio here, but was pulled into politics and was president of the Canton Social Democratic Party. He has been the mayor of Davos since January 2021. And then last, Laura Liswood. She's Secretary General of the Council of Women World Leaders. It's an independent network of 86 current and former presidents and prime ministers. She's advised on diversity at Goldman Sachs and is author of several books on how to ensure a fair and level playing field for anyone working to create a diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization. Before we start, I'd like to ask the audience a question, and you can respond by raising your hands. These questions are pretty straightforward. As I mentioned, the forum estimates that it will take 135 years to close the gender gap. Here is the question for you. Do you think that this gap can be narrowed? Please raise your hand if you think that gap can be narrowed, if it's possible. Okay, mostly optimists here. A few people who are not ready to commit to that goal. How many people here think it should be a top priority to do so? Raise your hands. To narrow the gap. Your presence here suggests you probably believe this. Okay, we got pretty much everyone in the room. Okay, so over the next roughly hour and a half, we're going to aim to deliver on that with ideas and commitments for how to best narrow that gap and how we can create an inclusive movement to do so. So I'm going to start by going to our panelists to ask each of you, and Samantha, I'm going to start with you, for the area where you think gender inequality requires the most attention, where would you start and why?
Well, thank you, Kevin, and everyone else for coming to this open forum. I certainly think that political leadership is really important. Women need decision-making power. At least in the US, we're seeing an influx of women going into higher government positions, and not just women, women of color. Lisa Cooks just became the first African-American woman to be appointed to the Federal Reserve Board, which is significant because we're living in a time of high inflation, and communities of color will be hit the hardest, right? Certainly we got our first vice president, Kamala Harris, which is something to shout about. She's also from Oakland, which is cool. But then also recognizing that women like Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first woman who was first African-American woman who was appointed to the Supreme Court earlier this year. So when we think about women in leadership, they need decision-making power. And I share that as a sense and I think what's significant about this day is that it's actually the anniversary of George Floyd. And why is that significant? Because when he was dying, he called out for his dead mother, right? So when we think about mothers being heroes of our community, right, oftentimes who are the unsung heroes, I think representation is important, and they need to be able to have decision-making power at the same time.
Great, thank you, Samantha. Angela, I'm going to turn to you and ask you the same question.
So first of all, just quick correction, Ushahidi is actually based in Kenya.
Oh, in Kenya, I'm sorry.
No worries. I think I had a similar opinion as Samantha, because I recognize that we've made quite a bit of progress on uneven access to education. We still have more to do. There's still a lot of challenges around employment inequality, but if we are looking to see decisions that are representative of the needs of women, then we do need to have women in leadership positions, be it in the political space, be it in industry, the tech industry, and everywhere else. We need to start thinking about how to get women in those leadership positions so that they're able to make decisions based on their own experiences and the experiences of other women.
Great. Philip, what your answer to that question? Where's the problem most urgent of inequality, and where would you start?
I find the question difficult because I think we need to move forward on many roads. And I think the most important of them are in terms of infrastructure to have enough and affordable child care. One of the most important things in Switzerland, at least at the moment. We need to eliminate laws which are discriminating, which are hold us back in reaching gender equality. And then, of course, there has to occur a big mind change towards or in terms of the known role models in the patriarchy.
Great. Laura, where's your starting point? What's the most urgent?
I think the challenge is what the mayor just said. It's difficult to have one starting point because they're all intertwined. I mean, I think with the gender gap report, there was a great belief that if we closed the health gaps, if we closed the education gaps, then naturally the economic and political gaps would close. Turns out there isn't anything natural about it, right? Because in many countries, not all, those health and education gaps are, they're not perfect yet, but they certainly are closing, So to me, unfortunately, if I think of both economic and political, asking that question that you asked, Kevin, is like asking me what's most important in a rectangle, the short line or the long line? No answer.
Okay.
Right.
Well,
so I'm gonna split my mind, agreeing completely with the political analysis that Samantha and Angela just said, and to you, Mr. Mayor, about some of the infrastructure issues. But I'm going to stick with both economics and politics on this one.
Okay, that's a fair answer. So why don't we start with politics? So according to political empowerment of women, and according to the Forum analysis, political empowerment is actually the area where there is the most work to do. They found that women just represented just 26% of parliament seats around the world and about 23% of government ministers. So we're pretty far from parity. I'd love to spend a few minutes talking about the key approaches that could be applied to narrowing this political equality gap, and who are the important members of the constituency, and how do you mobilize them? And Philip, I might start with you as a member of the political class, and then we'll come to the others.
Well, thank you. I think that is really an important part. And in my experience, when we talk about maybe motivating women for candidacies, for example, we always are confronted with the idea of party leaders and so on. Yeah, we tried to motivate, but we didn't find enough women to candidate. So, and in my experience, that is true. It was harder to motivate women than it was to motivate men. I think it's also kind of this role model thing where men are easier motivated to kind of have a really high self-esteem, right? And they think, yeah, I can do that, even if they're not as competent as any other woman would be. But then again, I tell these leaders, so, okay, you didn't fund any candidacies, but then you didn't search right, and you didn't search long enough, because what we did in the Social Democratic Party in Switzerland in the last few years, and also in the canton of Graubünden, we did an unwritten rule. We had an unwritten rule that we only present equal candidacies. So diverse lists of candidates, women and men, not only, also people with migrant backgrounds and so on. And actually, if you do that, and if you don't give up, and if you look for women, you will find women who will candidate. And I think that is an important thing. And maybe just an example: we had the elections of the council, of the county council, Sunday ago, and we made 27 out of 120 seats. 16 are women of this 27. Out of this 27, so yeah, that actually works. And I think we should actually force parties to present equally,
So it should be a requirement.
list. Yeah.
Yeah. Angela.
I think aside from looking at it from the perspective of the challenges in getting women into the political pipeline, I think we also need to ask ourselves the questions around the mindset of the people who are actually electing these people. Because for example, in the Kenyan case, right now we have one of the top presidential candidates who's selected a woman to be his running mate, and that's something that's historic. But when you go onto the ground and ask people questions about what do you think about this, you'll find that women in the urban areas are more excited, but then the mindset of those in rural areas is, what do you mean a woman can't lead us? We expect men to be the ones who lead us. Right? And that might also be a challenge that feeds into why women might not be making it into the political pipeline. Because if you've had it drummed into your mind from a very young age that leadership positions are typically for men, and you start to challenge that notion, but everything surrounding you is challenging that idea, then it becomes really difficult to make any headway. So I think we need to go at it from the root, where we start to model leadership around women and show the world and show our communities that women are capable leaders, and see how that affects the pipeline.
And so having more female political leaders is a compounding thing.
It definitely is.
Creating role models and expectations.
Yeah.
Laura, maybe I'll pull you in and then we'll come to Samantha.
Yes. Well, you know, that number is a bit deceptive on the 26, 23 in the sense it skews. You know, that's kind of an average number in a sense.
Yeah.
Some countries are much, much higher, and some countries are much, much lower, you know, to that. Now, and this may not be you know, an entirely welcome comment in some ways, because people have very different opinions about it. But generally speaking, the most effective tool for getting women into these positions in the governments is affirmative mechanisms. You know, in many countries in Europe have affirmative mechanisms. You know, Rwanda has an affirmative mechanism in place, and you know, it's not 100% of a good tool, right? But in truth of the matter is, it's the only one that's shown to create the inflection points that you need, because it does force people, as you were saying, Angela, to overcome cultural. They almost have no choice to overcome it, and you know, there's been lots of experiences with it. I mean, I think about the experience within India, where the panchayats require that 1/3 of city councils, local villages, 1/3 of city councils must be women. Yeah. The first round of that, when it first came out, it was all wives of men who were politicians. The second round was kind of a mix of women who wanted to be on it and wives of. And at this point, it's just women who want to be in the city councils. And the role modeling is what you're also indicating. The preference for sons has gone down, you know, because they see women in these empowered positions to being able to do things. The budgets have shifted away from major infrastructure projects to projects on health and education and things like that. So budgets have shifted. And it turns out also that, you were referencing it, Philip, which is that men have this wonderful trait called positive illusion. Fabulous trait, you know, which is, I'll only hear the positive about myself, and I think I can really, I have one qualification I meet of the 10, but hey, I meet that one, and that one was, I love sushi, but, yeah, little joke, but not much. And so, women want to see that politics isn't just an ambition game. They want to see that, because if you ask women, well, do you want to improve your health care in the community? Do you want to improve the living styles of people in this area? They all say, well, yes, of course, I do. And then you make the next, the next sales step, which is, okay, then we need you to step into these positions. And women do have to be asked, and often asked more than once. Where men don't have to be asked, and that's the good news, bad news in that regard. Yeah.
Laura, in terms of affirmative measures that you're talking about requirements that a certain percentage of candidates, a certain percentage of ministers, a certain percentage of city council members be female. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of ways of doing these affirmative mechanisms, whether the parties are required to do something, or there's these zipper notions, which every other person on the ballot has to be male, female, opposite gender kind of thing. There's all sorts of ways of doing this kind of stuff. And I haven't seen any affirmative mechanisms around cabinets, but you can certainly pressure the head of state or government to appoint a 50-50 cabinet. And many heads of state and government now are promising that as part of their platform. They will have a 50-50 cabinet. Now, the caution in that one is if your Minister of Defense is always a man and your Minister of Health is always a woman, then you have some gendered roles.
Yeah. Samantha, you pointed to political empowerment as the most important area when we started. What are your thoughts on the movement? How do we move it? How do we close that gap? And you pointed to some important breakthroughs in the U.S. in terms of women in different positions.
Yeah, I think that on one hand, while you can put a woman in a position, that doesn't necessarily equate to having power, right? So I think a large component of that is also having sponsorship, having individuals who are pushing candidates forward. A lot of these women who were able to be in their positions, they had advocates, particularly male advocates, that were supportive of their leadership as well. I think of an example in the legal field. There's the Manfield rule, in which a lot of firms are adopting, named after Abriella Manfield, and who was the first woman attorney in the U.S. So it's a consideration that law firms have to consider either women or people of color in leadership roles. So I think that is something that is measurable, but also thinking about having the sponsorship and capital behind it is necessary. So you can't just consider somebody. You need to be able to ensure that they have the skills that they need to succeed while they're in their positions.
Angela, before we move on to another area, I wanted to ask about the role of technology. And I think of you, Shahidi, as seeing technology as a route to empowerment in lots of ways, including politically. How would you make the connection?
First off, I think I would recognize the fact that technology is an enabler rather than the full solution. Yeah. It would be something that would be amplifying existing efforts. And the way I see technology probably supporting in that way, also from the perspective of how we use it, just amplifying the voices of women, being able to provide them with a platform where they can share their opinions and have those lead to some decision-making or influencing the kind of change that they want to see in the world. Could be means of being able to lobby and campaign or doing advocacy work. So just a really good way of being able to amplify some of the efforts that are being done offline.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn now to the second area, and the World Economic Forum had identified 4 areas of gaps, and the second largest one after political empowerment was economic participation and opportunity. On the one hand, proportion of women among skilled professionals continues to increase, but on the other, overall income disparities are only part way to being bridged, and there's a lack of women in business leadership positions. Laura, I want to maybe start with you. You've done a lot of work on workplaces and inclusion and fairness in that context. Where do you see opportunities for greater gender fairness in the workplace, and who are the key actors for that?
Yeah. Well, first, we do need to stipulate that that's a question that is looked at differently, sort of geographically or demographically, because in some countries, 90% of the workforce is in the informal economy, not the formal economy. So, I think we need to make sure that when we think about these kinds of issues, they're thought of in a disaggregated way. But if you're thinking particularly around the formal economies, I mean, clearly, and Philip, you alluded to it, there are still over 100 countries that have some discriminatory laws in place around, economic participation. And so making the laws fair is, it's like feeding chicken soup to a corpse. It can't hurt, but that's the starting place for it, because they have to be implemented and all of that. But, I think...
Can I just ask you what some of the laws are? What are examples of the laws you have in mind?
Hours you can work, amount of weight you can lift, those kinds of things are all the kinds of examples of which will have these subtle impacts of being able of gender. And then we saw, COVID, really ripped bare the difference between, how many women were in the service sectors and how many women were in the, in the industrial and manufacturing sector. COVID really hit women very hard. And, there is some speculation it can take a generation to get women back into the workforce at the percentage that they have been. And for a lot of cultures, there's a lot of cultural norms around women working outside of the home. And yet we know economic empowerment for women globally helps reinforce their status in a home. It does reduce gender-based violence. And it does reduce unwanted pregnancies with, younger women, et cetera. The statistics are there.
Yeah. So you mentioned discriminatory laws. Are there other key kind of policy approaches or approaches in terms of narrowing the gender gap in the economic sector, do you think?
The economic sector is, the challenge with that is when you have private sectors and everyone's walking around with unconscious roles in their heads and unconscious beliefs and unconscious perceptions of who people are, then a lot of companies that I do work with actually don't really have much of an intake problem in terms of women and other historically underrepresented groups. They're doing pretty good, getting women and other historically underrepresented groups into the workplace. But they definitely have an upgrade problem. You can get them in, but for some reason you can't get them up, kind of thing. And, we can talk ad nauseum of what the gatekeepers of that are. Maybe we will get into some of that as we dig down about that.
Great. Philip, I wanted to turn to you next, partly because Laura was mentioning the discriminatory laws. How should governments use their power most effectively to support gender equality in the economy?
Maybe I make the example of Switzerland, a debate we have going on in our country at the moment, or had it going on, and let's see when we do the next step in this direction. So, maternity leave.
Maternity leave, yeah.
I think it is one of the most discriminatory law, but it wasn't meant to be. So it comes from this patriarchy idea. So the mother is watching for children, staying at home, and we have this 14 weeks in Switzerland of maternity leave, right? And we managed some, months or years ago to increase the days of paternityhood up to 10 days, 2 weeks, actually. So 2 weeks paternity leave versus 14 weeks maternity leave. So, that lowers the value of women in the employee market massively. So, and that is an inequality we shouldn't accept. So we should work towards equal leaves, maternity, paternity, and then maybe add kind of a flexible portion where the mother or the parents, doesn't matter if mother and father, could also be father and father. I think that is maybe one really important example.
Yeah, and research shows that men taking parental leave is one of the biggest factors in a workplace for the gender equality, kind of interestingly. One of the, I think, areas of concern is that and Laura hinted at this, the jobs that women and men are in the economy are often different. And if you look at what, you might say are jobs of the future, that those jobs are less predominantly held by women, and women are in jobs that are more more vulnerable to automation and other, and other technology advances. And I want to ask both Samantha and Angela, because you're both in technology, can technology be a net positive for gender equality in, in this area? And Samantha, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think about some of the skills that women innately have that can't be replicated by AI, right? We're talking about listening. We're talking, not that men don't listen, but, listening, empathizing. There is a different level of soft skills in which women naturally possess. And we do live in an information economy, but that doesn't translate to a wisdom economy, right? Wisdom is the lived experience, and I think that in order to do business, you'll still need to have one-on-one conversations, which will still be essential. So having those skills, when we look at the future of work, is still going to be essential.
I would probably agree with that. And I use this example from Hidden Figures. I think when the IBM 7090 was being introduced and there was a risk of certain staff being phased out, and there was a group of women who decided to teach themselves a programming language so that they could manage that IBM system. So, in the same way that Samantha is saying, yes, we have automation coming in and it'll make things a lot more efficient, but it will not eliminate the need for human intervention. And I think it's about us as women and the rest of the world figuring out how to create or open up doors for women to be able to jump into those roles. And I know that there are many women in tech organizations that are doing a lot of work around training and mentorship to fill that gap.
And so bringing more women into STEM professions,
yes,
is part of it. So in the World Economic Forum rankings, the #1 country for gender equality was Iceland. And among the practices that Iceland has that is really interesting is that they require companies to, by law, to certify that the pay is equal among the genders in of their employees, rather than having they have to have external certification that is, and I see nodding, but I'm interested, that seems like a proposal that would get votes here. Philip, could you mount a campaign on the stage around that equal pay certification?
Yeah, I mean, we have that as well in Switzerland now. But it took us, 40 years ago, we wrote in our constitution that equal payment is required, that it has to be equal payment.
Yeah.
Nothing, maybe not nothing, but yeah, let's say nothing happened.
Yeah.
So, and a few years ago, we actually also did kind of this law that companies with more than 100 employees, they have to do this wage, this survey, at least a survey. Yeah. They have to do a survey and check whether there's equal payment or not. So that is a bit of an improvement, and I think it would be better if the number, if it's also applying to companies with 50 and more people, I think. But I mean, our example just shows it didn't work without law.
Yeah. Even if it is in law, it actually requires enforcement and other legal extensions. So we've looked at the first two of the 4 areas, and then interestingly, and Laura, you mentioned this at the beginning, gender gaps in the other 2 indexes of the World Economic Forum around educational attainment and health and survival are, on average, nearly closed. So there's educational attainment, 95% of the gap has been closed globally, and the figure is 96% for health and survival. These are obviously, as Laura said, not uniform across the world. Those are averages. But I want to ask you all, before we move on from that, whether you still see urgent gaps in educational attainment and health. And Laura, maybe I'll start with you, since you began by pointing to this.
Well, I think there's several elements to that. Number one, that's if you look at the top, you've got the Nordic nirvanas, which I call them, which is, and incidentally, part of the reason they're Nordic nirvanas is that they were fishing cultures back 1,000 years ago, or whatever. And the men went off to fish for 11 months of the year. And so the women had to do everything in society. So, you know, there's always sort of interesting sort of anthropological reasons for some of this stuff going on. But you can also find, you know, countries who are at the bottom of this list, and then you find that, you know, less than 50, the gap is, you know, over 50%, meaning that, you know, 2 times as many young boys are going to school than young girls, kind of thing. And unfortunately, we've seen, you know, even though, you know, I think Samantha and Angela would agree that technology advance is certain, right? We're always going to improve our technology. So then we mistakenly think that society will advance because technology advances. Well, it turns out society can go back to the Middle Ages, you know? And unfortunately, we see this happening in Afghanistan. You know, they're completely withdrawing women's and girls' abilities to have a decent education. So there's that part of it, you know. Then there's the part of it where you do have relatively good educational systems, et cetera, is where the girls are pushed into. You know, what educational elements, you know, are they encouraged to go into STEM, or they're not encouraged? You know, so you've got, you know, the baseline of just getting them into school and having a decent education, having school books and anything like that, teachers. But then once you get a sophisticated education system, you're still seeing a gender segregation going on with things. So I think, you know, I think part of the challenge is we're always looking for these magic bullets, and it's a lot more complex than we think.
Yeah.
You know?
Angela, do you have any reaction to that idea that around education and health? Yeah.
I would wholeheartedly agree. I had the same thought that we seem to have been able to bridge the gap in as far as them being actually able to get into school, but then we do have gendered sectors, right? Yeah. Like in our case with technology, yeah. Right? That we still have a significant portion of students taking on computer science, engineering courses, being men rather than women, right? And some of the factors that some of the factors surrounding that are, you know, it could be social and economic ones. It could be what responsibilities you have in the home. It could be just societal expectations around what you should go and what you should become. And that seems to be where we need to be putting in the effort. We've now managed to get the girls into schools, but are we getting them to get into careers that have been traditionally considered to be male-centered ones?
So we've now talked about these 4 areas that the forum has outlined. So political empowerment, economic participation and opportunity, education and health. So I want to turn to the audience for a minute. You can allow you to stretch your arms at least for a second at this juncture. And I'm going to ask you, I'm going to go through each of those 4 areas, and I'll say them again. And raise your hand for the ones that you think are the highest priorities. You can raise your hand more than once. So we won't hold you to one, and I think Laura will be happy with that. So the 4 areas are political empowerment, economic participation and opportunity, education, and health. So highest priority, political empowerment, raise your hand. Okay, we have about a quarter maybe of the folks. Economic participation and opportunity. All right, a little bit more, third, close to half. Education, about a third maybe, okay. And then health is the last one. Okay, health is the lowest of them in this group. So if I had to rank based on this very scientific observation of your raised hands, it seems like, and the panel can challenge me on this because they could possibly see better than I could. Economic participation and opportunity was the highest priority among this group, followed by political empowerment and education, probably pretty similar, and then health was the lowest priority. Not to say that it's not important, but in terms of narrowing the gap. Does any of you here have any reaction to that response? No? Not surprised? No. Okay. So we're going to come in a little bit to questions from the audience. So I hope that you all can be ready and thinking about things that you want to inject into the discussion. We're going to hold just a few minutes, and then, and I want to, before we jump into that, I want to talk about the inclusive coalition needed for achieving gender equality. And you know, one obvious place to start is men. What is the role of men in actually moving this forward? In addition to women, and Philip being the man, we're going to start. We're going to put this question to you first.
I think it's crucial that men start to engage in this debate. So they stood aside for too long, right? And gender gap, yeah, it's important. Women have to solve that problem. So no, it's not like that. It's affecting all of us, and we all have a role in it, of course, because we need to have the debate. We need to have a consciousness about the issues we were debating at the moment, because we debated a lot on laws, we debated a lot on maybe other things, on education and role models as well, but consciousness, mindset is also a very, very important puzzle piece on achieving gender equality. And I mean, you saw the video, right? And I mean, in terms of sexism, sexual harassment, the role of men is crucial. It's not a problem women have to solve. That's a problem men need to solve.
Samantha, what, you know, maybe I put the same question to you. What is, in terms of, I guess maybe who are the key members of an inclusive coalition around gender equality, but also the role of men, you know, in that?
Yeah, I think that we've been speaking singularly, right? So we definitely want to acknowledge those who don't identify and who are non-binary. So the distinction between just bystanders and upstanders, right? Sometimes it's not just the policy issue. It's really about being able to advocate for things as they are happening, right? So I think if you're in a meeting, if you don't hear somebody speaking up, if you see harassment happening, like what means and obligation does an individual have to be an advocate, not just when the spotlight is on them, but when it's happening right there in the moment. And I think those are the moments that it really matters.
Angela, what's your view?
I think it takes a recognition of the privilege that men have in this world, and using that privilege to support women. The best way I can frame it is be the giants on whose shoulders we're able to stand on, until we're able to stand on our own.
Yeah. Laura, how would you answer that?
Well, first and foremost, obviously articulating the message that gender equality is, you know, for all the genders, you know, because if it's unequal for some women, it's unequal for some men, you know, because your institutions are unequal in some way. So, you know, that privilege may vary depending on kind of who you are. It's also a message that I really think we need to get a better handle on around this sort of gender parity kinds of issues, which is that it's not a zero-sum game. You know, it's not if I win, you lose, you know, kind of thing. And, you know, I was reading a book relatively recently about kind of why men resist this, you know, and it wasn't because of some issues. I mean, men really truly believe in fairness. That was a basic, you know, sort of value that not all men, but men had. But what was causing some of the problem was loss of centrality, which I thought was an interesting notion, you know, loss of centrality. And what's interesting is Gina Davis she does a media foundation. She's done some research, and she found, for example, that when women are 20% of a room, men see 50%. When women are 30% of a room, men see 60%. So at less than majority, men see over. You know, now, not see it, you know, they sort of feel it maybe in some way. And not all men, obviously, we don't want to be too generalizing. But the notion that, you know, and for some men, I mean, COVID has been bad, you know, globalization has been bad, they've lost jobs, you know, kind of thing. But they're making a cause and effect error They're saying, well, I don't have a job because women are getting these opportunities. And we've got to break that link, and I think we have to think about the messaging that brings in, there's totally an inclusive message for both men and women. And, I think allyship is obviously important. We all need allies. But sometimes I think allyship is a little too mushy. I want real action. I want what Samantha's talking about. I want the active interventionist. Now this may surprise you, but I literally just a few years ago retired as a sergeant in the Metropolitan Police Department because after 9/11 I joined the police force. Very interesting experience. Certainly learned a lot about diversity and inclusion. But one of the things that is supposed to happen, and to your point around George Floyd, and we want to recognize that, the distress of that. The active intervention, a police officer is trained to do active intervention, but it did not happen. And we saw the tragedy of it when it did not happen, But that active intervention is really essential, and there's also I have yet to come up with a gender-friendly word for wingman. Wing person. Doesn't have the ring to it, But wingman, that person who's kind of with you, all the way along the way, kind of thing. And it used to be literally flying, and you have someone who's protecting you, on your wing, and you're flying. But it's changed to it. But I want that, I want those active interventionists and those wing people.
The wing people.
Come up with a better word.
Philip, yeah.
Maybe I got another notion, because not only being allies, but also fighting an own fight. Who said that I want to be the person in this construct of a family who is going to work 100% and having no role in raising children at all? So. Nobody told me that. It's just, it's the role models we know. So men should also start to fight for their own choice, whether they wanted to engage more in family work and in kind of equal, in an equal system here. So I think, then it's this then it's really this win-win situation you talk about.
Angela.
Yeah, I think thinking about it practically in the home as well, being equal partners. Because one of the things that doesn't get as much recognition as it should is the mental load that women have to carry in the home. It's all the planning, it's all the coordination. On top of everything else that you have to do, being an equal partner means that you also carry the mental load. It means that you also play an active role in taking care of the kids and cleaning and everything. So it starts from there. That's more. Yeah,
and the data I've seen suggests that during the pandemic, the load actually worsened even more as families dealt with suspension of education systems and caregiving and systems and things like that. We're going to go to questions in just a minute, but one last question I'd like to put forward is, how do we raise the next generation of girls, boys, however people are identifying, to be fixing this problem, to be not sitting on this panel in 20, 30 years, dealing with the gap, and so part of it is, how do you raise boys, to Philip's point, who resist the system and are part of the answer, but it's probably children of all genders need support. So maybe we can, Angela, do you have a thought on that? How the next generation is set up to succeed?
I think it's a thing that we've also been debating in my household to some extent, because it feels like we've put in a lot of effort to empower young women and have a lot of programs around that, but we're not raising boys to be able to handle empowered women. We're not raising boys to handle empowered women, and that's a huge gap that needs to be filled. how that can be done in small ways, you know, how even within the home setting, there's particular things that have been gendered, showing the children that just because you're a boy doesn't mean that you don't get to do A, B, C, and D, and that as they grow up, that's something that gets cemented in their minds. Having a household where the mother is able to go to work and they're able to see what an empowered woman looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So the next generation question, maybe Laura, do you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because, children do not grow up in a bubble, as much as we'd like to keep them, in the house, locked in the bubble. But they're not, they go to school.
During the pandemic.
The pandemic, yeah. But they go to school. They have video games. They watch television. They have their peer groups, right? They see other men, we don't know what role models they're looking at, I mean, there's a cute little study. They asked 11-year-old girls, what would happen if you came back as a boy? And the 11-year-old girls were like, I'll ride a bike, I'll climb a tree, I'll get dirty, right? Then they asked the 11-year-old boys, what would happen if you came back as a girl? Suicidal. They said things like, I'd throw myself off a bridge,
Wow.
So, something happened between 0 and 11.
11-year-old boys can be very troubling.
Well, that is true. But my point
It's dark.
is, something happened between 0 and 11.
Yeah.
Right? For the girls to go, yeah, fine. The boys to say, I'd kill myself.
Yeah.
So that's the difficult one, because if it only, Angela, we only keep them at home and only role model within the home. And, one comedian said, how to make, boys grow up to be, good men, laundry, do the laundry, But we can't do that. We can't do that. So we end up fighting a lot of different battles in a lot of different ways. Certainly good role modeling for the mother, good role modeling from the father, and support, and all of that. Again, it's going to be a step. But, and I just literally went to a breakfast this morning, which was kind of depressing. It was an index, an organization created this index, and the questioning around it was whether you thought that women were as entitled as men to be leaders.
To be leaders.
Yeah, and it varied across countries and everything like that. G7 varies, varying levels of it. But what they found was rather disturbingly that young men between the ages of 18 and like 26 or something like that, actually those numbers were going down.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a bit of a distressing sort of thing. And, again, that could be that linking of cause and effect, that we get all these women in and I can't get a date, because there are too many women in power, kind of thing. Yeah. So, unfortunately, I'm not too sanguine about this yet, and yet, I've got the mayor here sitting next to me saying, I'm going, God, can we replicate you?
So the inclusive coalition includes replicating.
Yes.
Philip, cloning. Cloning is part of the answer. Samantha, I want to ask you the same question. When you think about the next generation?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been thinking about the acronym LIP in terms of paying lip service, instead being like leadership, right? Who are the women that we're putting in leadership? Inclusion, how are we bringing these women together? And then what power do they have? And I think about that age gap in which Laura is talking about. And I remember growing up in a two-parent home, I remember seeing my parents working 7 days a week, seeing my father have mainly all the decision-making power. And he would give us our allowances. And when I realized that if I didn't do what he said, I wasn't going to get my allowance. I got my first job when I was 10 years old, right? Not because I had to, but because I wanted that same decision-making power. And I think if we can give women those opportunities really young, that's essential. But I also thinking about not just giving women who are in from particular communities as well. So I think about the Global Shapers Oakland Hub, and who was actually founded by Lakshmi Lagaris, who is a single mother, right? So if you think about, the innate skills that women have, if we don't put so much emphasis on hard skills versus the soft skills, which are just as essential to the workforce, I think that is sending a message to our children, our boys and girls, that they're just as valuable when it comes to the future of work.
Great. And Philip, the next generation, what do you think is key to?
I try to do it in 3 words.
Yeah.
Boys do cry.
Boys do cry.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we're going to go on that. We're going to go.
Now we know what you mean.
We're going to go to the audience. So if anybody has a question or comment, wants to come in the front row here, thank you for being the first. We have a microphone that's coming, actually. And if you want to say your name and if you're affiliated with any organization or anything, please.
Yeah, I'm Ryan Santos. I'm a venture capitalist from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Great.
One of our portfolio companies is called Kobe. We are a hybrid of a education institution, a business club, and a venture capital startup hub. Yeah. And we charge a pretty high price for Brazil, is around $2,000 to $3,000 a year, which for a country with weak currency is quite a lot. Yeah. And we are the largest hub for young entrepreneurs in our country. 5% of our 2,000 members are women. And this company, Kobe, has a woman CEO. She's amazing, Rafaela Freire. We try to get an affirmative action, kind of like a 50% discount for women. However, the 100 women who are already there, they are like, come on, no. Because I sweat, I deserve to be here, and like these women, they need to deserve just like me. And that's my dilemma. How, maybe Laura, Samantha, how can I increase the female participation in this business club I have for young entrepreneurs in Brazil without hurting the 100 very, very successful women who are already there, and they actually have problem dating because in a macho country, women these powerful women, they have a hard time finding a man who is willing to go on a date with a woman who makes more money than him. So that's my dilemma. My biggest dilemma is like, how can I deal with the already successful women who are there and who don't want like a easier entry for me to raise that number.
Yeah.
Or Angela, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think one of the immediate thing that came to my mind is maybe get them to mentor these other women who you're trying to bring into the program. There has to be a way for us to be able to give back to our communities, and just, I think it goes back to the comment that I made before, being the giant on whose shoulder somebody else can stand on. That when I walk in through a door, that I make sure that I'm able to leave that door open for the other woman to come in, because that's how we're going to be able to progress. So in your case, what I would propose is probably have a conversation with the 5% that you currently have, and have a discussion around, okay, what were the challenges that you faced, and how can you then make that much easier for somebody else coming in afterwards, whether that's in the form of skills transfer, is it providing them with some mentorship around how to get funding to get access to pay the fee, but get them involved. They should, I would hope that they'd be willing to provide some mentorship and support to bring other women in, rather than close the door.
Samantha, did you want to?
No, I think, again, to that, exactly what Angela said, but also it goes to sponsorship for me, investing in other opportunities, and more time just getting to know each other. I think so much time has passed, and I see this oftentimes in the legal community where it took women so many years to become a partner, where they recognize that times have changed and they don't feel like individuals not have the same opportunities, but it's easier for them. So I think that being able to invest in opportunities where women can go and learn together, so that they're sharing experiences, but also so that they understand the history of how long it took for things to actually happen.
Sounds like pricing is playing a role in the consideration. And so it actually points to how sort of basic quotidian questions like what someone pays are factors in ultimately the gender diversity of your organization. And so maybe you could have your organization put some of their innovative efforts to a pricing structure that would address the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Rebellion. All right. Well, let's take a few other questions. We have one. Yeah, thank you. We have one in the front row here, and then some in the side here. So we'll start front row. Thank you for running over with the microphone.
Thank you. I have a question, well, to the entire panel, but I'll start with Philip because he touched a point that is very close to my heart. If I understood correctly, you mentioned some unwritten rule in your party that a certain percentage of seats should be filled by women. Now, where I'm a bit torn apart, and I would be interested on the panel's opinion on that, is what do I think about such a minimum threshold, a minimum rate of women to be in a certain position? I mean, I have a PhD in international business administration. I did, during my career as a postdoc researcher, I was focusing on artificial intelligence. I was a full professor in supply chain management. I don't want to ask myself, do I really get the job now because of my gender? And pardon my French, because of my boobs? Or is it because of my career path and my experience? So I seriously wonder what's the panel's opinion on that? And how to basically balance that. On one hand side, really making sure that women with the background get all and the skills, get all the possibilities and also the support that they need in order to rise and shine. But on the other hand side, don't stigmatize them just because we need yet another woman to fill yet another position in leadership, in the leadership team, in order for, I don't know, the board or the leadership team not just to be filled by white men.
Mm. Philip, do you want to start on that? Yeah.
Well, I can say I totally support ratios in the implementation of ratios in boards of big companies. I think if we want to speed up, it is a way to speed it up. I don't think it should be forever. But I think it is just something we need to do if we want to speed it up. But I'm not sure if we also should go in this direction with I don't know, democratically elected parliaments, for example. But as I mentioned, maybe it could be a way there so that we kind of or the law kind of forces parties to kind of have a ratio on their list of candidacies. So I mean that could actually be a way to not legally have a ratio for the parliament, but at least give people a choice, a large enough choice to even be able to elect maybe a large amount of women.
Yeah. Laura, do you?
Yeah. Let me add a little bit to that, to your point, because I do often hear that kind of commentary. First and foremost, the underlying assumption of that is all the men who'd been chosen for the board are the absolute best people that they could find, you know, and they weren't chosen just because they were the buddy of somebody else on the golf course. Okay, so we have to stipulate that, you know, that. So if you put your mind around that, then you, with your PhD, look pretty good to me. You know, so you know, let's just make sure we put it in perspective there.
We just need to call Laura for a pep talk.
Yeah, but let me add to that because there's a very instructive example off of this kind of thing, and it's the Norwegian boards. And some of you probably know the Norwegian law. It requires that 40% of board members must be of the opposite gender. That's what it means. But because there were so few women, it meant 40% women. All right, and if the public corporation doesn't get to 40% women, it's delisted from the Norwegian Stock Exchange and dissolved as a company, right? Okay, yeah, right. So, you know, they couldn't find any qualified women before the law. Amazing how quickly they found the qualified women after the law. But what was interesting about this, first and foremost, at 40%, complete critical mass, this whole notion of less qualified, not, you know, I'm the gender woman, disappears. You know? And it turns out statistically, these women had about 2 years less corporate experience and about 3 years more education experience. So, you know, and this in-group favoritism and closed social networks goes away. Right? And they found several things happened with this now that there was a critical mass of O's in a room full of X's. They found out, for example, that women read the board materials. What can I tell you? Yeah. So now the men are coming to the board having read the board materials. So what does that tell you? That tells you the very presence of the non-dominant group, right, improves the performance of the dominant group. That's what that tells you, right? More of the board decisions are made within the boardroom, not golf course, nightclub, country club, right? So transparency levels go up. Women asked more questions. They asked different questions, which incidentally made the board meetings go a little longer, you know, a little more conflict to them, but came out, you know, because one of the things that we know from research is that homogeneous groups don't come to better solutions. They just think they did. Yeah. And heterogeneous groups come to better solutions. They just don't think they did because of the conflict and the tensions and all that. Then they discovered, which I thought was really important, that men had a tendency to look at the short-term impact of board decisions. Women had a tendency to look at the long-term impact of board decisions. Now I ask you, what do best boards do? Short-term and long-term. Men had a tendency to look at the shareholder impact of board decisions. Women had a tendency to look at the stakeholder impact of board decisions. Stakeholders, employees, environments, communities. What do best boards do? Shareholder and stakeholder. Right? So you began to see the value of this critical mass of O's in a room full of X's, you know, with that. So that's why I've much more come to the supporting of these notions of affirmative mechanisms in place. Right, you don't know how to golf, neither do I.
Golf is not required. We'll come over, we'll make our way over here, and then there, and then over in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Shreya Desari, and I'm 18. I'm South Indian, born and living in Bern, Switzerland. And I'm a computer science student, and in our class we're 3 girls, and the rest were boys. And the class under me is only a boy class. And I've come across situations where I had interviews and people would only take me because I'm South Indian and India is known for generalizing IT, engineering, medicine, and law. And we're talking about the gender gap right now. How do you see the gap between people of color and the gender gap there? Because here in Switzerland, you have a smaller community with people of color versus, let's say, the US or anywhere else. How can you bring that forth? Because I have a hard time finding a way to stand up as a person of color and a girl who is stepping into a field which is just so male dominant here in IT.
Yeah, you know, I think that whether we're talking particularly with the tech field, and the numbers are very small, whether it be women as well as people of color. That said, again, when we talk about the future of work and the skills that are needed, right, there's an area to shine. And then the criteria in which people are going for in terms of selecting these candidates, you don't necessarily need a university degree to be in these spaces anymore, right? So we're talking about a lot of technical schools, boot camps, coding. You know, there's a variety of mechanisms that people are using to show forth an educational knowledge or just being self-trained. So I think that as much as, because you don't want to just be selected because you're that token person of color, nor because you're the woman, right? So you want to show yourself just as qualified, but I think at the same time, feeling comfortable to bring all of yourself and your variety of background will stand out in those areas, right? I think that people understand that as they look demographically that the numbers are small, but that doesn't mean that that isn't an opportunity for you to stand out in it.
Can we take another question? Thank you. Maybe on the aisle here, and then we'll, right there, and then we'll come into to you both.
Hello, my name is Linda. I actually live here in Davos as well, like Philip.
Thank you for hosting
And I have two little stories to share, and I would like to have some crowd intelligence of how to react to these moments of, you know, it's not, I mean, I don't feel treated unequal, but it's like small little inequalities. So I live an equal family model, so my partner and I, we take care of the kids, like we work the same percentage, we take care of the kids the same percentage. So when my partner tells people that, it's like, wow, you take care of your girl, you have a daddy's day. And when I tell that to people, it's like, wow, that's a lot, how can you manage? So I'm like, what's the difference, right? So I usually don't react to these little things. And the other thing is daycare, right? So daycare, you register your child. At daycare, only women work at daycare. Another thing, I mean, why do only women work at daycare? Yeah. That's another question. That's a bigger topic. So you put father's contact details, you put mother's contact details. Whenever there is something, mother gets contacted. So I usually don't react to these things, but I would love to have some crowd intelligence of how to react to these things, how to change these society kind of norms that are in the very small everyday life.
But they add up. They add up. Laura, do you have thoughts on this? No.
Go to somebody else.
Okay.
I think media plays a huge role just in terms of how women and men get portrayed, right? So I think that your individual family just making a deliberate stance like, okay, can you call dad next time, right? But being able to, it's hard, right? It's not over time that people change the projections in their head as to what they think about in the traditional norm of caretaking, right? So I think that having a deliberate stand for yourself, but also recognizing that media plays a large part of what people consider that to be a part of it. So I would point the finger to media about that.
In media meaning like the TV shows people watch
Yeah,
or things
TV
like
shows,
that.
commercials, you know, ads, advertisements, right?
Yeah.
And maybe just to add, I think in your own way, in a small way, also calling it out when it does happen, because I would assume that the daycare isn't doing it, like it's something that's subconscious, and when you call it out, it brings it into the consciousness that the next time they'll be more mindful about it, right? The next time they call you after you've made the request for them to call the dad, then you know that you actually have a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will also say that there's quite a bit of research now that shows when a job application, you're talking about, you know, the daycare workers are almost all women, not very many men, that there's a lot of research now going on about what a job description sounds like, you know, and what are the words, you know. So for example, in tech, you know, if your job description says, boy, I want a super ninja, you know, who's going to conquer the world, most of the women go, yeah, not really me, you know. But if you say, hey, you're going to help your communities in a collaborative way, and we're a team group, you get an increase of women and people of color who say, yeah, I want to do that kind of thing. So you know, it might be an interesting thing to have whoever's, you know, running the daycare centers look at these job specs and say, maybe there's not enough words in there that would attract men to these positions. You know, that you know, to your point, Samantha, that some of this, you know, that women are skewed into these, you know, collaborative, caring, all of that kind of. Well, men can be collaborative and caring too, but they also might want to, you know, help shape the destiny of the next generation of heroes. I mean, I don't know, I'm making that one up, but you know, there could be words that are embedded here that you're skewing in the sectors.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
The last ad for women. We'll take some other questions. Phil, did you want to add anything, or?
I think everything's said. I think this is this process we're in, right? This mind change, which is it is starting. It is somehow happening, and I also have a lot of these experiences with other, also with men. When I actually have a friend, he is working 80%. I mean, it's not so, it's enough. Monday evening is the evening when he is just home and he's looking for the kids. And then his working colleagues, they said, today we have to work a little longer, right? And he was saying, no, I have to go home. It's my night of the kids. Or don't you have a wife at home? So it still exists, and I think we need to go through that. We need to mention it. We need to say, hey, we need to make it normal. But I mean, I'm coming back to what I said with our laws. If we have laws, maternity leave, right? The laws they tell us that mothers watch after their children. So how should we do this mind change if our laws kind of imply that this is normal? So we need to do both and then kind of go through that process, which can be hard.
We have some questions here, and then we'll come over to that side. So we have 3 questions here. Yeah.
Yes, hi, my name is Saif. I'm a global shaper from Montreal, fellow global shaper. My question is about political empowerment, but I want to start with the why.
What?
The why. Mayor, you used the word patriarchal, and that really resonated because the entire world right now has been built since the age of discovery on 3 adjectives. I'll highlight just that one, patriarchal. But if we were to go back to how, for example, indigenous communities socialized boys and girls, it was very different. And they would actually find it really surprising that European women needed to be submissive to the man. So my question specifically, and as a Canadian, this really resonates, is how can we make sure that we get women of color? I mean, yes, I'm a man, but as a man of color, it's the issue of intersectionality for me. Why I really get this is really powerful, because the reason why we need women and women of color in these roles is because these systems are not working as we want them to. So these are not women's issues. These are the issues that we need to fix for all of our good. So my question specifically is, yes, how can we get more women in positions of power and women of color, but not to sustain the same systems that have created the situation that we're in?
I mean, even that word itself, I think as a poet, I'm wary of like the how, right? Because I think how, there's the assumption that there is a linear way of doing something. And I think every culture is different ultimately. But I think it's less about how and start with the women who are around you. And again, like, are they being mentored? Do they have leadership? Every time an opportunity comes up, do you think of them, right? And then what access to power do they have? So we acknowledged before that it's not enough to have them in these positions. They need to be able to have decision-making power. And I use the example of the founder of the Oakland Hub, Lakshmi Garris, right? Because she was a single mother. She was raised in foster care, right? So when we think about the issues as it relates to poverty, right? This is someone who was able to create a space of young thinkers and being able to bring them together and give us an opportunity to have access to power in that way, right? So I think that if you can find women for particular communities, and less about the how and more so, and the example I'd like to use, how do you teach a baby to crawl? They just start walking, right, and crawling and falling, and I think some of that is the mistakes that are associated with that. And to Laura's point, that we don't necessarily have to lose, right? And failure, which people like to talk about in the entrepreneurial communities, right, it's so much more acceptable when a man does it versus when a woman does it, right? If a woman becomes a mother or is a part of society, then she doesn't have a life after that, right? We need to be able to invest in women, but give them the opportunity to fail and grow and lead and be able to be invested in every level of their leadership.
I guess the question is, are women finding themselves in positions of power just to further reinforce patriarchal systems as opposed to being given the freedom to dismantle them, or?
I don't think so. I think that when women step in, and right now you're not just seeing, we talk about patriarchal, you're talking about white supremacy too, right? So the difference in women of color leading too, right? We're changing these systems altogether, not just changing systems, changing communities at the same time. So I don't think that women, when they step into these roles, they have different backgrounds, and they're leading from a space of empathy and leading with this idea that their communities are the experts, so they're gonna lead with their knowledge at the forefront versus I know everything and I have all the answers.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to recognize that change in itself is hard and will take time. And that there's so many other, things that might not be visible to us on this other side that these women are having to fight when they're on the inside, and just being able to acknowledge that.
We have a few questions over here, 3 in a row, and then we're going to come to the other side. About 9 minutes left, so if you can keep your comments fairly, yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes, pretty quick. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Paulo Henrique. I'm Brazilian. I'm an electronic engineer based in Paris, and I'm doing my PhD in Denmark in 6G networks. My question is related to gender equality, racial equality, together with the role of technology. I give you one example and where it comes from. Recently, I was reading one of the reports of ITU, which was saying for each 1% of new citizen in one country, in one population, that joins mobile broadband, mobile internet, the GDP raised 0.15%, something like that. My question is, what is the role of new technologies to foster gender equality and racial equality? Why I'm asking you this? In my country, in Brazil, there is a big question now, big debate, that for the black community, it's very important to reinforce their position as a consumers. So thinking like that, they can change the interests of the companies. And we are seeing some change. But I'm asking, is only through economy, or is there anything else that can be done to bring minorities and gender equality to foster in these new days that we are living in?
Angela, do you want it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is probably just from my own experience running a company that focuses on marginalized groups, but yes, I do think that technology plays a big role in the fight for equality in many ways, because what it does is it kind of levels out, I wouldn't say leveling out the playing field, but it provides a way of being able to elevate and surface some of these voices that ideally wouldn't be heard or seen before, right? I think one of the biggest examples of that is like when we think about the issues that we're getting to hear about around racial inequalities. Perfect example is George Floyd. Because of the mobile phone and internet access, we were able to get to see that and able to advocate for change because of that. Many years ago, maybe we would never have known. Maybe it would have, gotten swept under the rug. But here, the mobile phone now is actually being used as a very good way of being able to not only surface these stories and create awareness about it, but shift the conversation away from this is happening into how do we make sure that this doesn't happen anymore? So, yeah.
We have maybe one question in the second row here we can go. Thank you for your patience waiting.
Thank you. My name is Andrea. I am from Ecuador. I have a question for the mayor. So what actions do you think are key from the local level to close the gender gap?
I think that is a difficult question because, oh, sorry? No,
yeah,
you hear me. I think it is actually a difficult question because I talked about the laws before, and I mean when we discuss our paternity leave in our municipality, that is a difficult debate if the laws from the federation, from the cantons, are like they are at the moment. So it is really difficult to have this different situation. So I think we have to solve these problems, these law problems, on the highest level possible, so that we don't. Otherwise, we get this kind of how to say that, these differences between different entrepreneurs, between different municipalities, and so on. So we really have to enforce that on a federal level, I guess. What we try to do at the moment is to really move on, or how to say that, improve our infrastructure of the childhood care. Daycare was mentioned before. I think we need to. That is something we can do at the municipality. Maybe take more action, take more lead to kind of ensure quality, to kind of maybe avoid situations like the lady here in the room experienced. So I think this is something we can do in the municipality, and it's something we want to do as our one goal of our legislation. Yeah.
So we're just about out of time. I'd ask maybe the panel just to wrap up here, to take on the assignment of, in a few words, summarizing what the single most important thing that you take away from this discussion is, or what is the one change you might make. And I'm going to go in reverse order. So maybe Laura, you can start us off. We just have 2 minutes, so if we can keep the summaries short, that'd be great.
Well,
Thank you.
It's going to be very short. I think it's more about what the word Angela mentioned, which is change. Yeah. How do you get people to change? Yeah. Thucydides said people change for 3 reasons, and 3 reasons only: fear, self-interest, or honor, the Greek term honor, which in our language means vision. Yeah. So I guess, when we think about all of these things, is it too painful for me if I don't change? What will I gain if I do change? Or, like the mayor, do I have a vision of where I want to see things going? And because we've got all these problems, all these dimensions, but really it ultimately comes down to the human nature of change.
Great. Philip?
Well, I agree. But if I have to add something, I think on each of these levels we discussed, we need to continue the struggle for equal payment, equal time, and equal respect. And for all the women, not only in good positions, and not only between men and women, but also amongst the society as a whole in its whole diversity.
Yeah. Angela?
I had a point, but I'm not going to piggyback off of what Laura said, because that was a very good way of articulating what we've been trying to talk about throughout this whole panel. Right? What is it that's going to drive this change? And it feels like a lot of our conversations have been around the honor and self-interest. But maybe there needs to be an aspect of fear, and maybe that's where policy comes into play, which is what Philip has been advocating for. So that's my big takeaway.
Great. Samantha?
Yeah,
Final
I think
thoughts.
winning, we can all win, in which Laura referred to. Like, we can all win, but it requires that each of us share power. So I think we need to share power.
I have lots of notes, lots of takeaways myself from this, including, Samantha, you're talking about lip service, leadership, inclusion, and power, starting with the woman around you is a pretty good point. Angela, the idea of raising boys to be with empowered women, and that is a powerful thing. Philip, you're men fighting for their own choice, taking responsibility, but also seeing a better world where there is equality and being active participants for that. Laura, wing people is a term we're all going to walk away from here with, but also your real point about this not being a zero-sum and the nature of change that's required. So thank you all for being part of this. Thank you to this amazing group of panelists here and their real wisdom on this topic. And hopefully this will not be a necessary panel for the generation to come. We can all hope that this will, and work towards not having to have this panel. So hope you all the best for the rest of your days, and thank you to this amazing group.